how some people slowly get into a swimming pool? They do like one toe at a time, and then it gets up to their ankles, and then they wait a minute, and then it gets up to their knees, and slowly, any of those people in the room, that's how you get into a pool? Okay. And then there's those crazy people who go way back and go da-da-da-da, psh, and cannonball. Any of those people? What, the rest of you don't swim? You need lessons? That'll be a class. But either way is fine, actually, as long as ultimately you get all in. Right? You get all in. Or there are football fans, and today would be a big game in the football world, and there are some football fans who just attend the game. And they might be a little bored, and I have an image of some very bored football fans. Look at them. One guy's texting. In fact, a lot of people have left, evidently, and one guy's smelling his armpit. I don't get that, but so they're kind of bored with the whole game. And then there are fans that are all in. And I've got an image of these people. So here's the Eagles, these guys are all in. They're all in to football. Now, amazing, but please don't come to church dressed like this. We have a little room we'll put you in. This is how you go. But just like at church you can go all in 1 foot at a time or jump in totally. However you do it, the important thing is all in. 34 years ago, Philip and I started Oasis Church in the city of Los Angeles, Actually started in a home in Beverly Hills and just kind of grew from there. And do you know what? It was not cool to have a church in the city. The cool people were heading to the suburbs. But the not cool people, of which we were them, had a church in the city. It's funny, right now it's kind of cool to bring a church in the city, but back in the 80s, we were it. And over the years, we've rented different venues and various places. We met in junior high school auditoriums and community centers. We met in the park. I mean, that sounds so peaceful, the park. It's terrible. It was terrible. There'd be like little kids riding their bike, randomly in the middle of the message. Just, nope, not cool. And Philip and I would load up our trunk, with the equipment, with the sound system. I can wrap cables with the best of them. I learned how to do that. And we'd have a small team of volunteers. And at this time, Philip did predominantly most of the teaching. And then I served everywhere from children's ministry to greeters and actually even handled the overhead projector. The 80s. This is the 80s. Listen, the overhead was the cool thing. We didn't have screens like this. No, overhead projector. It was one step from hymnals, right? That's my job. But we were all in. Whatever it took, we just served in every area. Well, the Bible has a lot to say about serving. I'm going to read a few verses, and the context here of the verses that I'm reading is the disciples, James and John, had just asked Jesus if one could sit on his right and one could sit on his left in the kingdom of God, because at this time, remember, they think that Jesus will be a king on earth. And so this was Jesus' reply to the whole group. In Mark 10, he said, when the other 10 disciples heard of this conversation between James and John and Jesus, they lost their temper with James and John. Jesus got them together to settle things down. He said, you've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, he said, and when people get a little power, how it quickly goes to their heads. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That's what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for many who are held hostage. So what he's saying is that the one who stands tallest in God's kingdom is the one who serves others, the one who considers others better than himself, the one who seeks to serve, not to be served. This is the one who looks like Jesus. And then he goes on to say, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life away. Now, why did he say that? Because, see, he was talking to his disciples, and at this point, they had very self-centered reasons for following Jesus. They thought that Jesus was going to overthrow the Roman government and set up a Jewish kingdom that would rule the land. And then they would get to be in charge with Jesus. They were thinking, we get to be the vice presidents. This is going to be awesome. They were looking forward to the fame and the power and the wealth and the honor. It was all about them. Their eyes were on themselves. And Jesus said, stop thinking this way. He said, even the Son of Man did not come to be served. And the truth is, if anybody ought to be served, it would be Jesus. He's God. He deserves the honor and the worship. He deserves the attention. But he said, that's not why I've come. His eyes were not on himself. There was a movie that came out a few years ago called The Guardian, in which Kevin Costner played a man named Senior Chief Randall. And he is in the Coast Guard, and he's one of the top rescue swimmers. These are the swimmers that go out when boats are sinking in the middle of, the ocean and cold waters and dark. And so he's a top rescue swimmer. And in this movie, he's teaching at the academy with some of the new recruits. And in this clip that I'm going to show you, rather than teach them about hypothermia, he actually does something else. So take a look at this clip.
First stage is hypothermia, the most critical. Why? Because you still have the ability to think. Say it. Still have the ability to think. The decisions you make during this stage are going to determine whether you live or die. Is there a reason you're not breathing, goldfish? Is there a reason why you're not breathing?
I don't know anyone who can stay alive without breathing for 15 minutes, Senior Chief.
Are you a coroner? Because pronouncing people dead is not part of our job description. What do we always say? We never stop, Jake. Not from the cabin to the tarmac. We never stop.
All right, Senior Chief.
Understood? Yes, Senior Chief. Okay, Jake, in the swole. Hodge, you're up. You're with the dummy. All right, now. 3 letters. 3 letters will get you people a cup of hot coffee and a blanket. What do you say, goldfish?
Actually, not that cold anymore, Senior Chief.
You're not cold anymore because blood is moving from your outer extremities to your heart. That's why your arms won't work. You can plan on spending roughly 60% of your career in a mildly hypothermic state.
Senior Chief, may I have a word? Why wasn't I informed of this? We have classrooms. And your assignment is to simply teach the stages of hypothermia.
Sir, in about 2.5 minutes, they'll understand. Permission to carry on, sir?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Senior Chief Randall, he had a choice. He could have taught those recruits about hypothermia as an abstract theory during a lecture in a classroom, but instead he chose to fill a pool with freezing water and ice and then actually share the experience with the students. He wanted them to see and feel the effects of hypothermia rather than just hear about it in a classroom. And Jesus, who is the greatest teacher, he did something very similar. He wanted to teach his disciples about serving others, but instead of just telling them, go serve people, he showed them. And just as those recruits understood hypothermia by being in the cold water, Jesus knew that we would actually learn better by watching him actually serve. And this is the living example Jesus gave them. So this is a jug that I'm saying represents perhaps a jug that would have been from the 1st century, Christianity, the New Testament, and, a basin that perhaps represents the basin that he's going to use. And then here's the all-in towel, our towel. And in the New Testament, in the book of John, it's the story that I am referring to. Now, there was a custom that occurred at most dinner parties. In the New Testament days, most people walked around wearing sandals on very dusty streets. And if you were going to a dinner party, then the host of the dinner party would arrange to have an hourly worker, a servant-type person, actually kneel down and help the guests take their sandals off, and then would pour water over the person's feet. And then they would put the person's feet in the basin, and then they would dry the guest's feet. Now, the idea is that the guests would now feel more comfortable because they're not, going to have a 3-hour dinner with 30 feet. And complicating this is that in ancient times, people reclined at tables. So your feet were going to be in somebody's face. So this is a custom that was widely done. Foot washing, very common thing. Well, the book of John tells us that Jesus is going to have a dinner party with his 12 followers, and everything's been arranged. But they walk into the room, and there's no foot washer guy. Right? It might have been an administrative oversight. I don't know. Pastor Bill Hybel says, we're led to believe that the absence of this foot washing attendant created some very interesting tension among the followers of Jesus. It's like they were standing there going, hey, who's going to kneel down and do this nasty little job? Because it's disgusting. And then the text doesn't explicitly say this, but I just picture in my mind Peter thinking, hey, listen, I'm one of the top 3. So if you think I'm getting on my knees and doing that, nah, not a chance. And then maybe somebody else says, hey, I was one of the first ones chosen. And then somebody else says, I'm not going to do that. And I just picture them all standing around with their arms crossed going, this is so not going to happen. That is beneath me. Right? One of those awkward little moments. But we're led to believe at this dinner party with Jesus and his followers, the tension didn't just get resolved in 4 or 5 seconds. I mean, the disciples just froze, basically saying, I'm not going to do it. None of them agreed to do it. And after a while, it seemed like no one was going to do it. Now, there's a detail in this story that's recorded in John 13, and I'll read it in just a few moments, but this is a detail I find fascinating. It says in verse 2, the food was finally served, which indicates that the disciples were so determined not to lower themselves to the foot washing task that they said, look, just serve the food. I'd rather sit with your dirty feet in my face than stoop to wash them. So everyone reclined, and then the food was served. Well, now the scriptures record that Jesus was watching this whole little mini drama, and he does something that is recorded for all of history. He gets up from the reclined position after the food has been served and the dinner has been in progress, and it says he takes his outer cloak off. Now, servants didn't have an outer cloak, so when he takes it off, he is symbolizing he is becoming a servant. And it says then he pours a jug of water and he gets on his hands and knees and he starts washing the grimy feet of his followers. John 13, verse 2 says, the evening meal was in progress. Some translations say supper being ended, the food was finally served. And the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. But Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Okay, can you imagine how quiet it got in the room? I mean, do you think the disciples, when they saw Jesus getting on his hands and knees and washing their feet, do you think that they just went on conversationally saying things like, hey, pass the bread? I don't think so. I think it was deathly quiet. And maybe they were a little bit embarrassed. And I mean, how embarrassing would it have been for them to have Jesus when he finally came to their feet? Here he was demonstrating a willingness to do for them what they had not been willing to do for each other. And when he finishes with the last guy, he's standing there with this filthy towel and this basin filled with muddy water. And then he says these words to his disciples. In John 13, verse 12, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. He says, do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. So basically, he's doing something like this. He takes off his cloak, again, symbolizing that his cloak was not bright blue and didn't have embroidery on it, but you get the point. So he takes off his cloak, symbolizing what I'm about to become a servant for you. And then he kneels down. He kneels down. And he takes a basin, and he takes a jug, and he begins to do the very disgusting thing that nobody in the room wanted to do. He pours water, and he takes their very messy, dirty feet and begins to dry them. And I started thinking, you know what? What he was doing, see, there might be some places in the world where foot washing is still necessary. You know, some cultures that live in dusty areas and wear sandals, and that would still be necessary. But for most of us here today, we wear shoes. And foot washing isn't really a tradition or something that would be necessary before we have dinner. But the principle of this is like, he was doing something that nobody wanted to do. So in 2018, what is the thing that you don't want to do? Help somebody move? Bah! No, give me the foot washing thing. I'll wash somebody's feet. I don't want to help them move. Drive someone to LAX? Take care of your mom who has Alzheimer's? What is that you don't want to do? What's serving? You know, Philip likes our garage organized. And there's like boxes, and we have so many books, and it's, you know, so many pieces and parts, and, you know, he loves to get it organized, and I hate to do that. But I do it. It's like, can I wash your feet, Philip? Because I'd rather do this. What is the thing that you don't want to do? That's what Jesus is asking. Before, actually, I met Philip, I was working as an actress, and I was in the early 80s, and when you go on an audition, you are in a room with people who look just like you because they're looking for that type and that part. So I was in a room full of, you know, a bunch of tall, skinny, blonde people. And we're all in this room, and I'm who I am, so I'm like, hey, how you doing? And talking to people, and nobody talks in those rooms. And so I'm in there, I didn't care. So I'm talking to them, and then there's this one girl, and she gets up to go do her audition, and I noticed that you could see straight through, you know, her dress, and which it was not cool in the 80s. I mean, now you do what you want, but it wasn't cool then. And so I had a slip, so I took my slip off, and, you know, I gave it to her so she could wear it, and so she went in, did the audition, she did her thing, she came out, you know, returned it to me, and I did it, and then I did audition, end of the day. Well, 2 weeks later, I turn on the television. There she is. There she is. And you know what? Meg Ryan never sent me a thank you letter. No kidding, it was her. For that slip. See, sometimes you serve people and they get the reward. Are you willing to serve people? Are you willing to serve people? And let me just tell you, I'm putting my cloak back on. I've never regretted serving people, ever. There's a lot of things I've done in my life where I might have focused on myself, and I regret those things, but I've never regretted the opportunities I've had to serve people. Those are not the moments in my life I regret. So let me just make a couple of observations from this text that I read. First, when I look at that text about Jesus washing people's feet, I realize that he is unapologetically calling every one of his followers to acts of kindness and servanthood. He says, I want it to be a distinctive characteristic of the people who bear my name. I want them to be identified from all of the rest of the people in society as those people who will do what normal, pride-filled people are unwilling to do. In the words of this series, Jesus says, I'm asking my followers to go all in, to look beyond their own petty concerns about social status and how many followers they have on Instagram and titles and positions, my wants, my desires, my little turf. I'm calling every one of my followers to pick up the towel, to be a servant. And he doesn't make this call in some dreamy, obscure way, but he calls and teaches and demonstrates in this very practical way. He says, look, I'm calling you to practical acts of service and kindness, like opening doors for each other, like offering to help out around the house or the office or the classroom, like serving in church, perhaps by welcoming people pulling into the parking lot who've had a really bad week, like helping someone find their seat, like changing diapers in the nursery, like reading to a toddler, like picking up trash in the church lobby maybe when you see it, or helping us on our outreach team clean a local elementary school or feed families in the neighborhood, acts of service. That's what Jesus is saying. Are you willing to be those people? And I like the section of the text where Jesus says, now if I, your teacher and your Lord, God in the flesh, if foot washing is not beneath me, then it's not beneath you. If I'm willing to do the thing that nobody wants to do, are you? See, we should be able and willing to do acts of kindness and radical service at work, at home, in church, wherever you are. Why don't we create a culture and a community where we're walking into situations wherever we go and go, what kindness, what service can I do right here? How about when I walk into here? As opposed to stepping into a situation looking for somebody who can do something for me, why don't I step into a situation with this towel in my mind and go, what can I do for someone else? Have that mindset. And the other part of this text, and I just kind of really saw it clearly when I was looking at it this last week. He says, now that I've explained this to you, Jesus talking, he says, you'll be blessed. He's saying, if you do this kind of stuff, radical serving, you will be blessed. Here is Jesus making this blanket across the board, no exception promise, that towel bearers, those that go all in, practically serving people, will become the recipients of God's sovereign blessing and favor. So here's the question. Do you believe that? Do you? Do you believe it enough that you would reorder the value system of your life around the promise of Jesus that if you were to take up the towel, you would be blessed? See, one of the most important decisions you can make in your life is, are you going to consistently keep looking for more? More money, more power, more applause, more fame, whatever it is. And obviously those are not all bad, but the question is, what are you banking your fulfillment hope on? Do you think if you get more, then you're going to feel blessed and live in a God-blessed way? And you're going to have inner satisfaction and peace? Do you think it's actually going to come from doing those things? Or is it more likely to come through towel bearing? This is fundamentally one of the most important questions, honestly, we'll ever ask ourselves. Philip and I had the chance to go to Israel a few years ago and spend some time around the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is where Jesus did most of his ministry and called some of his disciples from around there. It's the city of Capernaum is on the seashore of the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is filled with fish. There are so many fish. And fishermen, back in the day, back in Jesus' day, they made a living fishing there, and to this day they make a living selling fish from the Sea of Galilee. It's filled with fish. I have a map of Israel I'll just show you so you can see some of the geography here. Okay, so there's the Sea of Galilee up at the top. And then the Jordan River connects from the Sea of Galilee at the top where Capernaum is, down to, it's labeled there the Salt Sea, but that's also called the Dead Sea. Now, at the Dead Sea, the water of the Dead Sea evaporates and leaves behind salt. So the Dead Sea actually has 33% salt content. Very salty. And maybe you've seen images of people in the Dead Sea floating on it because it's so easy to float. They can read a paper floating in the Dead Sea. But there's so much salt in there that there is no life. Nothing lives in the Dead Sea. No plant, no fish, nothing lives in the Dead Sea. I mean, it's great to float on, but nothing can live in it. Why? Because there are no rivers that flow from the Dead Sea. It receives all that fresh water, and then it stays there. It receives, but it does not give. And if we are going to be the blessed people that Jesus is talking about, full of life, we can't just receive, we have to actually receive and then give, or we'll just be full of dead things. We'll just have no life in us, and I don't want this community to be filled with people who have no life in them. We're not Dead Sea people, we're Sea of Galilee people, filled with life. Other than, you can take that off now. Everybody's got their geography. Other than Jesus, the man in the world who is generally regarded as very wise in the Old Testament is a man named Solomon. But he actually got this decision wrong during an era of his life. And I think we can learn from him to reinforce the likelihood that we'll get this decision right. So in the book of Ecclesiastes, we read that Solomon, in one era of his life, he just dove into the deep end of self-gratification. He said, enough of that towel-bearing stuff. I am not going to do that anymore. I'm going to focus on me, 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 me. Now let me just read a couple of verses out of his story in Ecclesiastes 2, starting in verse 4. So this is Solomon. He says, I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. And I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines, or some translations say a big harem. I had everything a man could desire. So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me. And my wisdom never failed me, except this time. Anything I wanted, I would take. Listen to this verse. I denied myself no pleasure. So this pleasure-seeking binge that he went on. So he says in this, he said, I decided to build houses for myself. I mean, one's not going to do, two's not going to do. I need lots of houses. And then after that, I planted vineyards for myself. I mean, no doubt to be able to grow his own wine and put his face on the label or something. And then he said, I constructed gardens and parks, and I planted trees for myself. I mean, everyone needs their own botanical garden, don't they? And then he says, well, he's not done yet. Is he finished with that binge? No. When you get to this self-gratification quest, you rarely stop. You just want more. And then he said, so then I bought slaves and huge herds of livestock to impress all my friends, and then I decided to amass all this gold and silver for myself. Is he finished? Nope. Then he goes on, I acquired men and women singers. Do you understand what he's saying? He didn't just download songs to play for his house. No, he bought the band. The band, the drummers and the vocalists, the whole deal. He didn't just attend the opera. He bought the opera so that they could sing to him in his private quarters. And then after that text, it says he bought a harem. I don't even know how to comment on that. And then verse 10 summarizes this hedonistic buying binge, and he says, I denied myself no pleasure. I decided to deny myself nothing that my eyes desired. It's almost unbelievable. But I mean, maybe some people would call that the realization of the All-American Dream. To have the opportunity and the resources to be able to deny yourself nothing that your eyes desire, to be able to acquire all that material and artistic desires and all that. But then we're going to read the very next verse. And if you've never read it before, maybe it should be highlighted in your iPhone or underlined in your Bible. Ecclesiastes 2:11, he said this, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. Another translation puts it this way, vanity, vanity, the whole thing. All of that pursuit was just vanity. So here's the smartest guy in the world, and he's shooting for soul satisfaction and a sense of meaning by means of massive self-gratification pursuit. And it's a total bust. I mean, does that surprise you? I mean, come on, the hedonism treadmill, it's basically whatever we have, we adapt, and we just want more. We just keep going. And we know this is true because it seems like we read almost every week in the papers or you see it on your news feed or on television. We just hear about tragic stories of people who gain access to power and money and fame and whatever. And then they bet their entire fulfillment farm to gratify their desires. And then we watch the stories of their lives unravel and self-destruct. You think that at some point in human history, there will be a chorus of 1 million voices saying, don't do it like that. Don't do it like that. If you try to satisfy the self-gratification monster in you, he's just going to eat you alive and spit you out. And then you'll get to the end of your one and only life. And so maybe you ask, well, what's the alternative? It's the towel. It's the towel. It's acting on the promise that if you serve other people, if you serve others, you'll be blessed. So let me just ask you, what's going to fulfill your bucket 5, 10, 15 years down the road so that you're saying my life 15 years from now, you're saying my life is overflowing with meaning? What decision are you going to make now so that 15 years from now, you're not the broken person saying, vanity, vanity, my life was just like chasing the wind? You have to make up your mind it's going to be the all-in, towel kind of life. You know, tonight is the Super Bowl, and there'll be 50,000 people in great need of exercise cheering on 11 people in great need of rest. And sometimes, you know what? I wonder if church isn't the same. There are many of you here at Oasis Church, and you serve, in different capacities. You are the towel bearers, and I just want to thank you for being a part of the all-in team. But I know that there's some of you in here, and maybe you just attend. And that's okay for a while. It's okay to, get your feet wet a little at a time. It's okay. But at some point, as followers of Jesus, you have to pick up the towel. You have to be a part of the team in some capacity. See, Oasis, it's really either the towel and the life and example of Jesus, or you're betting everything on the fulfillment of money and fame and power. And you got one life, and it's a huge gamble. So I'm just challenging every one of you to take up the towel. Go all in. Go all in. Try it. Go down that road and see where it leads. What do you say? Let's be those people. And do you know what I know is that there are probably some people in here right now, and maybe you have a heart to serve. You're hearing me teach this and listen to the words of Jesus, and you go, that's me, that's my heart. But Holly, I just don't know how to make it fit with my life right now. I have kids and a couple of jobs, and I just don't know how to make it work. I mean, I want to, I have that heart, but I don't know how to do that. Is anybody like that? You have the heart, but you just can't figure it out. Come on, be honest with me. This is the interactive part. Yeah, there's some of you in here like that. You have the heart. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pray for you, because I think God wants all of us to be the towel bearers. And so if somehow we have the heart, but we're not able to do it, then I want to pray that God can change that. Does that make sense? Father, I thank you for those people who just raised their hand and said, yep, Pastor Holly, I have the desire, but I can't figure out how to make it work with my life. So God, I pray for those people, and I just thank you that you will show them, you will make it clear, and that you will open a door, you'll make a way. And I thank you, God, that none of us in here will lose sight of the fact that we're not here to be served. We're here to serve. And God, I thank you that we will be those people who will do the things no one else will want to do, the dirty, grimy tasks that no one else will want to do. We're not above any of it. I thank you, God, that that's the kind of community we're building. Towel bearers. Maybe just keep your eyes closed just for a moment. Just eliminating some distractions. And I don't know the spiritual condition of everybody in this room, and maybe there's some of you in here and you've never actually made your peace with God. You've never surrendered your heart and your life to the God who loves you so much that he sent his son Jesus to pay the price for you, to offer forgiveness for all of your sins, all of them, and to give you a future filled with hope. Maybe you've never actually opened your heart to the love of God. Or maybe there's some of you in here, and at one point you did say yes to Jesus, and you were following him, but maybe you got tired or offended or hurt or weary. I don't know. But if you were honest, you'd have to say you're not really all in, you're not 100% following him, it's more like from a distance, then I want to pray for you. And I'm not going to embarrass you or anything, but we don't want to end any gathering where we don't give people a chance to reconnect with the love of God, to make that decision. And so for the first time you're saying yes to following Jesus, then I want to pray for you. Or if you're in here and you're coming back to him, you're once again going, okay, I'm ready to take the next step on the journey of following Jesus, then I want to pray for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to count to 3, and I'm going to ask you to put your hand up and then put it back down, just so I know who I'm praying for. So if you're in here and for the first time, you're saying yes, yes to the love of God, yes to everything that Jesus has for you. Or if you're in here and you just need to reconnect again, get back up, begin following him once again. The posture of God is always welcome home. So maybe you're in here and for the first time you know it's time to say yes, or you're coming back to him. I'm going to count to 3 and then just put those hands up so I can see them. 1, 2, 3. That's awesome. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, back there, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I think. God, I think I see most of the hands. But you know their name. You know who they are. You know the situation and circumstances of their life. And I thank you, God, that from this moment on, they're a new creation. All things become new now. I'm going to lead us in a prayer, and we're all going to pray it together. And those of you that raised your hands, you're believing these words in your heart, but you're praying it with us, but we'll all pray it together. So everybody say, Father, all of us, Father, thank you for loving me. Thank you for forgiving me. And from this moment on, I choose you. I surrender my heart and my life to Jesus. Amen. So good. So good.